Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Let me remind you, this is the course Global Implication of Chinese Characteristics Socialism, or Socialism with Chinese Characteristics in the New Era. This is a joint effort by the ALC-China network, as well as UNAM and the UDOALC, which is the Union of Universities of Latin America and the Caribbean, in collaboration with Renmin University of China. We're very thankful to Xiaoyao Consulting, which has done an excellent job of interpreting, as you have witnessed during the past 4 sessions. Thank you so much to Alonso Coronado and Ybor Zhao. This is our 5th session, and it will also be our last session. May I remind everyone, in the first session, Dr. Xuefen gave us a general perspective on the significance of Xi Jinping's thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for a new era. The second session by Professor Wang Yiwei was about Chinese foreign relations and the study of the Belt and Road Initiative. The third session by Professor Song Feng was on energy and carbon economy, as well as China's multiple efforts and its South-South cooperation on environmental issues. For the fourth session, Dr. Liu Fuxing shared his analysis of the Chinese education system and the differences in China's educational cooperation with the Global South, particularly with Latin America and the Caribbean. All of these sessions are recorded in Spanish and English, and they will also be available in Chinese through the ALC-China network. Today we will have the presentation by Professor Mao Xuefen on rural and agricultural issues in China from a global perspective, which is a critical issue both globally and in Latin America and the Caribbean. And this is highly linked with socioeconomical and environmental factors that have been addressed in previous sessions. Professor Mao Xuefen is Deputy Director of the Rural Revitalization Academy of China at Renmin University and of the School of Agricultural Economics and Rural Development, also at Renmin University. He is a researcher at the Academy of Xi Jinping Thought on Socialism with Chinese Characteristics for a New Era, and was selected by Beijing as a top participant in the Young Talent Program for higher education institutions. His research and publications have focused in particular on the theory and policies of agricultural development, the future of agricultural products, and smart agriculture. His projects have been funded by numerous institutions, including the Ministry of Education of the People's Republic of China. So, as all of the previous colleagues, we want to emphasize that today's lecturer is highly specialized and a highly recognized lecturer in China and abroad. Dr. Mao Xuefen, you have the floor now. Thank you, Dr. Dussel, for your kind presentation. Now, I would like to engage in some brief exchange of ideas with everyone regarding the topic of how to better understand China's rural revitalization. My name is Xuefen, and I come from the School of Agricultural Economics and Rural Development at Renmin University of China. Our school is a leading institution in China, focusing on the modernization of agriculture and rural area, with nearly 70 faculty members dedicated to agricultural economic theory and policy. Ever since its foundation, our academy has been focused on rural modernization. And here you can see my contact information, my WeChat ID, my email. If any of you want to further communicate with me, you're welcome to do it through the aforementioned means. Nowadays, everyone is looking at the modernization of agriculture because that is the global tendency. And a lot of countries have run into many issues regarding this area. For example, income gap, environmental challenges, etc. However, the Chinese experience has been very different than that of other countries. So from an academic perspective, I would like to talk about that path and the Chinese experience. So we can maybe present some experiences that are worth learning from and sharing. So my presentation for today will include 6 sections. First of which is a presentation of China's rural development practices. The second session would be the history and the development path that has been followed by China regarding agricultural development. Then we will talk about how we have solved some key issues and key challenges that have arisen during this path. So I will be talking about this path, this journey together with you. The third section would be about the practical achievements. What have we achieved and how have we achieved it? Number 4, I will be talking about some innovations in public policy design regarding this topic. And I will be doing this from the perspective of implementation and design of public policy. So maybe we can learn some valuable experiences that China has had in this domain. The 5th section will be about specific challenges that we are still facing today, such as income and wealth gaps, the challenge to continue to increase the income of peasants, and other challenges. And the number 6, I will be talking about the plans for the future. What is the direction in which this urban development and modernization will continue to walk in the future? So these are the 6 main parts of my presentation today. And today I will just be sharing some objective data and some objective aspects that describe the way the Chinese modernization process has been implemented. I won't be getting too ideological. I won't be talking about other more abstract principles or ideas, but just describing the Chinese experience in this regard. So let's begin with the first section, which is how do we begin to understand rural development in China? What are its unique characteristics and what is its global significance? First of all, I ask everyone a question. Why should we focus on China's rural revitalization practice? Well, I think we can sum it up in 3 sentences, which is this revitalization is a historic leap from general poverty to common prosperity. As you know, in the world, there are not that many highly industrialized nations, and there are even less countries that have experienced a swift historic leap from general poverty to common prosperity. Maybe we can name some examples in Asia, but I think the Chinese experience is quite unique in this regard. The second characteristic is our governance, that we have been able to go from turbulence risk to stable and orderly governance in a way that is a step-by-step manner. It's not an abrupt or violent change. And we have not done this by exploiting resources from other nations, which is something very rare in world history. So we have also not exploited or deprived the peasants, the national peasants, from their resources, which is also very rare in world history. So here, this is what we mean when we say the process of modernization in rural areas in China has not been a turbulent one, has not been a violent one, has been a moderate, controlled, stable, gradual development process. And the third characteristic is that this path of modernization has been very respectful with the environment. A lot of countries during their industrialization process created great levels of contamination and damage to the environment. And this is a challenge that a lot of nations in the world are facing right now. How to lower the damage that they are incurring in environmental terms. But in China, this modernization process has been very eco-friendly, very respectful to the environment. So it's been a sustainable process. I would like to share with everyone something that is key, which is that industrialization has happened in many different countries and areas in the world. But in China, industrialization has taken less time. It's been a more moderate, gradual change, and it has had less negative effects on the environment. So this is what we mean when we talk about a process that is amicable to the environment and to human relations overall. And I think this answers the question of why it is worth focusing on the Chinese rural revitalization practices. Now, let's talk about the economic growth that has taken place in the People's Republic of China. Well, this has materialized in the way of an increase in the income of peasants in China. And remember that peasants are the main characters in this story, in the story of rural modernization and revitalization. So the income, the average income of, or the disposable income of peasants in China has grown 457 times between 1949 and 2022. So it's been a tremendous development. Of course, we still have a lot of things to achieve, but we can see that this increase in income, in disposable income, is materialized in different ways. For example, rural infrastructure has improved significantly, and people now have access to internet, to roads, to electric power, and all of this has transformed the way rural areas look and are experienced by their inhabitants in their day-to-day life. This is a graphic that shows the rapid increase in disposable income of rural residents in China. Now, here we can see some data regarding income composition of rural residents in China between 2000 and 2022. We can see how throughout time, every day we have more peasants that have left the rural areas. They have moved out of the rural areas, but the land remains. their rights on land have remained untouched. So whenever we have economic turmoil in the city, these peasants that have relocated in urban areas can always choose to go back to their rural hometowns. And I believe this is quite remarkable, because what happens if peasants cannot go back to their rural hometowns? Well, if in the face of economic turmoil and challenging circumstances, they would have to remain in the cities, and they would have to live on the street or in very challenging conditions. So that is the importance that they have this, that they still have this option to return to their hometowns if things get challenging in the city. Here we have some data that show the change in length of rural roads. So, and this is measured in kilometers. As you can see, this is also an important change, and it is present in many different areas in the rural sections of the Chinese territory, and this has had a positive effect on commerce, on connectivity, and on economic development overall. Now, another thing that we have done as part of the modernization process of the rural areas has been the efforts to eradicate extreme poverty and absolute poverty in China. As you know, by 2020, we had already lifted more than 800 million people out of poverty in China. And as you know, since the beginning of the Chinese history, it's been a shared challenge to feed such a big population. So a strategy to feed the population is to increase the production of certain grains and certain foods, and have a planified rural managing in order to cover the population's need in this area. This has been part of the strategy to lift millions of people out of poverty in China. We have also realized that some of the rural population were not living in the areas that were covered by the original policies intending to fight poverty. So then we had to expand the scope of these policies to cover even more villages, so as to not let anyone behind or anyone outside of these poverty alleviation efforts. So if we look at this from a perspective of development and a perspective of population control, I think it's a great achievement to be able to feed and secure the basic needs of such a large amount of people in such a short period of time. So moving on to the next subject, let's talk about the moderate path that has been the approach of the Chinese nation in achieving the modernization of the rural areas. Let me share with you different highlights of this process. First of all, we're talking about collective property, collective land ownership. I've mentioned that we have millions of rural workers who are peasants, but then relocate in the city to be able to work in the city. We're talking about 290 million people. These 290 peasant or rural workers that relocate in the cities, they maintain their land rights back in their hometown. So they can go to the city, they can have access to an urban lifestyle, but then if their urban style of life comes to enters a phase of economic hardship or economic turmoil, they have the prerogative to move back to their original rural homeland, where the cost of living is it's way lower, and then this is something that has allowed them to maintain an economic situation, a stable economic situation. This is one of the reasons that explain why there are no favelas, there are no lost cities or areas with a lot of population who are living on the streets in China. We don't have this because it's not needed. People who face hardship in the cities can always go back to the rural hometowns. Now, another important area is employment. And employment, it's available for these migrant workers in many different cities in China. If they cannot find employment in one city, they can always move to another city. Sometimes even go to the coast regions of the country. But this is all a very gradual process. No disruption, no lack of stability. So we are talking about 13 million people who enter cities looking for new jobs annually. And this flexibility in terms of relocation and migration in the search of employment is a great strategy to ensure people have always access to employment, to health services, to having their basic needs met. So this, first of all, we adopted a mass approach in which we try to extend these benefits to the most people. Then we entered a second stage in which we are trying to elevate and increase the quality of these public services. So as you can see, it's a highly planned public policy that we have been implementing. Now, these are some data regarding the migrant workers within specific communities and inter-provincial migrant workers who go across to other regions and other provinces. And here we have some numbers about the subsidies and the grants that have been facilitated by different levels of government to these workers. I won't go into detail regarding this. The following highlight that I would like to talk about is how this revitalization process has been respectful to the environment. This is an industrialization process that has always tried to follow a green path of development. In China, we have a system that allows us to evaluate continuously these public policies as they are being implemented, and even before they are implemented from the design stage, because we cannot approve or agree to implement something that is going to be very detrimental or severely harmful to the environment. This is why we have this system in place to maintain a policy that is respectful to the environment. And President Xi Jinping has said that we need to turn green mountains into gold mountains. And what this means is an eco-friendly policy and a development model that is respectful to the environment can also bring material benefits to the peasant population, to the rural population. So it is not one or the other, but they can work in synergy and complement each other, including bringing about higher levels of tourism, including ecotourism and other kinds of tourism. Here we have some proof of how we have been increasing the forest coverage at the national level. And this is a graphic that shows the usage of fertilizers, pesticides, and agricultural film in Chinese territory. So as you can see, we first had an increase that peaked near the year 2015, and then it has been steadily declining because we are addressing these areas of that affect the environment, and we're taking steps to reverse and control and reverse the damage to the environment that can be brought about by these actions. Here we can see at the level of village or at the level of municipality, we have different policies and systems in place for harmless disposal of garbage and increasing the levels of hygiene and the practices of hygiene within the household, within the community, and even bringing about some new technologies like turning garbage into energy. And in this way, we can benefit the peasants even more. And all of this is designed by our government. Now, I have talked to different people, and they usually ask me, why do we need to focus on the rural areas? Why should we focus on the rural side? And me, from an academic perspective, I would like to emphasize different aspects. First of all, talking about it from a global perspective, if we look at China as a case study, we can reflect together, and we can all the countries in the world and all the global community, we can reflect on the experiences that have been implemented in China and what we can learn from them. First of all, let's state that China is a very large country with a 5,000-year history, and it is also a socialist country. So the path that China has chosen has great continuity from a historic perspective, and it has a lot of common points with between their taking into account his historical trajectory. So here I would like to talk about the different models of development. For example, the dependency model of development is something that has been implemented in other countries, such as South Korea or even some countries in Latin America. But this is not the model that has been followed by China, because we have not relied or depended on other nations to achieve this development. It has been a self-dependent, a self-reliant process of industrialization, of finding the tools and the ways to feed our own people, and depending on our own people to achieve this modernization process. I do believe each country is looking for its own path of development. And this is a point that I want to emphasize. There is no right or wrong way. There is not a right path to development that applies to every single country. But we have to understand that every country has its own history, its own development trajectory, and its own development stages. So we need to go on a case-by-case basis. We are opening up this path as we walk it, and we are focusing on different tasks that appear in front of our eyes as we are moving towards a common goal. So this is why it is important to look at the Chinese case within its own context. Now, and another thing that is very important to notice when talking about the Chinese experience is there is great synergy between government and other social forces. Of course, government is the one that leads, and where the market fails, when the market fails, the government can correct or can help recuperate or can help alleviate some of the turmoil caused by market failures. So the government is the great leading hand, and it is the role of the government to be the one coordinating and leading the development process. And this is what our government has done. Now, in order for new markets to be able to emerge in rural areas, there's a lot of work that has to be done. We need to create the proper conditions and create the new actors that are needed for these new markets to emerge, such as companies, such as different entities. It's not that the government leaves it all to the market as if the market is omnipotent. It is not. It is not that. It is a very complex process of synergies between different actors, but that is led by the government. And what if we follow the example of other countries, or something that we have seen in different regions across history, which is you have a very underdeveloped rural area, and then you just let the capital flow in, and you just let the private enterprise to achieve that industrialization, achieve that modernization in a way that they see fit, and they just make a lot of money by doing it. Well, what happens in that case, more often than not, is that the lives of the peasants and of the inhabitants of the rural inhabitants of those areas are not improved, and they are affected negatively. So that is why we have a different process of development in the Chinese approach. And that is why the role of the government as the leading factor is so important. Now, I would also like to say that China has gone to great lengths in order to maintain social stability, and not only social stability, political stability, and economical stability. Because without this stability, it is very hard to achieve any comprehensive development process. So on the economic side, it is important to have stability to be able to have great flows of investment coming into the country and coming into the rural areas that drive this development forward. Another thing that I want to talk about is the historical conditions. So this is entering the second section of the presentation. So let's talk about where did we start, what is the historical starting point, and what is the development path that we have followed. So this I will discuss mainly focusing on three aspects. First of all, three important stages. First of which is starting with the foundation of the People's Republic in 1949, going all the way to 1978. So there's people who may say that rural revitalization starts as recently as the 18th National Congress. But actually, this is a process that has been cooking and has been in the making for a long, long time, for decades in China. For example, this first stage, which I call new rural reconstruction, we can see that when the republic was first established, the country was really poor, and the number one priority was to be able to feed the entire population. So how did we achieve this? Well, we distributed the land amongst the peasants, and by this I do not mean privatizing. We didn't privatize the land. We didn't privatize the property. We just gave the land to the peasants, but the land was collectively owned. And here I would like to say that China has always focused on grain production. And back then we only had about a grain production or a grain output or about over 200 kilograms per capita. And now we have increased significantly. So the main focus of the main reason of focusing on grain output or grain production was to become independent in the food security regard. We don't want to be such a large population, such as the Chinese population. We don't want to be relying on a third party. We don't want to be relying in importing food in order to be able to feed our entire population. So how did we achieve this increase in grain output and food production? By redistributing land between the peasants and between the rural population. And there is a Nobel laureate that has said that in China there are two great inventions, which are the generalization of agricultural technology, and then the second great achievement is to eradicate illiteracy amongst the population. So what do we mean by generalizing the agricultural technology? Well, the government had a policy in order to give access to all the peasant population to the leading technology in agricultural production back in the day. And this allowed for a more evenly distributed development in the rural areas. Now, let's talk about the second stage of this rural modernization process, which is from 1978 to 2012. And this is what we called the transformation and differentiation. So here we can see that industrialization started first in areas that were coast adjacent. It's near the coast. Then it started happening towards the mainland. So this came along with migration waves, relocation of great numbers of peasants who were relocating from the rural areas to the urban areas. So, of course, this came with many problems because, for example, a lot of the times, some families had to be separated in order for this process to take place. Sometimes the parents would relocate in the cities in order to be able to have better economic opportunities, but then the children would stay in the rural areas. So this has been an important challenge of the urban revitalization process in China. So, but there have been another public policies that have been put in place, such as tax, for example, giving tax breaks or lowering taxes and even granting subsidies for agricultural development to certain peasants. So this fiscal policy has always has also been a part of this rural modernization process. These have been some drastic changes that we have had historically in the rural revitalization area. And the third stage, which is from 2012 to today, we can talk about, we still have some people who are living in underserved communities, right? Back in this year, we still had some villages and some population that was living in poverty. So starting in 2013, the Chinese government started to implement an comprehensive poverty alleviation and eradication strategy. And then in 2017, we achieved to the elimination of absolute poverty at the national scale. And that is why, after achieving the elimination of absolute poverty on a national scale, that's where we then proposed the quote unquote policy of rural revitalization. So what you can see is that during this stage, we had more investment coming into the rural areas in order to industrialize it, to build better buildings, to build better infrastructure. And this way, we were able to offset some of the economic turmoil that was experienced in urban zones. And during this period is where we started to revitalize rural areas. So in 2020, we achieved the elimination of poverty, and then we started the comprehensive rural revitalization program. So as you can see, I have divided this development process in 3 big stages. In this way, it's easier for everyone to understand what has happened in China from the foundation to the process to the modern state of affairs. But I divided it in 3 stages, but it could be easily divided into 4 stages, 5 stages, or be divided differently. But the important point that you shouldn't miss is how this has affected the lives of peasants within the national territory. Now, the next part of my presentation is regarding some practical achievements, and I will approach this from a multidimensional angle. So when I say multi-dimensional, is these practical achievements have modified and improved the image of the rural communities, their governance, their infrastructure, many areas. But I would like to focus on 5 different aspects, and we'll go one by one. So here we have what has come after the rural revitalization proposal back in 2017. Well, first of all, we had the industrial revitalization because the industry is the base of employment generation, and the employment generation is the base to income increases. So not only, so by modernizing the agriculture, we can also improve the income level of peasants. So before, peasants didn't have a lot of choices in order to make money. They could just basically plant the different things that they would plant in their crop, and then they would sell them on the market. But now, through this modernization process, they can process these materials. They can not only sell what they harvest, but they can process it, and then they can sell processed goods. For example, coffee. For emerging countries and development countries, especially those who rely on selling their raw materials, for example, coffee, in this case, the coffee beans. If we look at the Yunnan case, you can see that the peasants in Yunnan, the peasants in Yunnan province, they do not only sell the coffee beans, but they also sell the processed coffee. They also sell the ground coffee. They open coffee shops. They even sell coffee flour. So they have a variety of products that are derived. So as you can say, I don't know if you understand my point by this, but for example, Ethiopia, which is a coffee producing country, they only sell the coffee beans. But in China, coffee is not only the coffee beans. People produce coffee beans, but they also have coffee shops. They also sell different brands of ground coffee. They have coffee related touristic spots. They have all of this industry and this microeconomy around coffee. And this is just one example, but the same goes for different kinds of agricultural products. For example, flours, vinegar, etc. They have these agricultural sub-industries have integrated the three stages, primary, secondary, and tertiary, into one unified chain. Now, I would also like to talk about some of the efforts done by the universities in order to develop new technologies and popularize the existing technologies. So they will develop these new technologies and then they will apply this to the rural areas. So these are very complex research and development processes that have proven quite successful because now we have different varieties of grain, for example, of corn, of wheat, of different kinds of grains. We have different varieties and different, it's a more specialized and more specific industry. Now, another important factor is e-commerce. As everyone knows, China is a very big country with a very vast territory from east to west, from north to south. And this means that agricultural products can be sold quite successfully to the domestic market. And we don't even need an export market in order to have a successful business. When we're talking about agricultural products. So how do we reach different markets within the national economy, within the national territory? Well, this can be done through e-commerce channels. So different kinds of applications and softwares of e-commerce, different e-commerce platforms allow peasants to reach customers directly. People have always mentioned JT, Temu, Alibaba, etc. All of these are e-commerce platforms, and they allow for peasants to sell their products to final consumers. So from an economic perspective, this solves the problem of how to produce, who to produce, and how to adjust production according to consumer specific needs, how to adjust the scale of production, the standards of production. All of this can be understood and better utilized directly by peasants through the innovation of e-commerce platforms. So in this case, I believe China sets a great example for the rest of the world. And due to the time limitations for today's presentation, I won't go deeper into the e-commerce topic, but I think this is plays a key role when we're talking about the integration between the three sectors. Now, another important point has to do with talent attraction. As I have said, a lot of very talented people have moved from rural areas to urban areas. But nowadays, the Chinese government is implementing different kinds of public policies in order to make it desirable for young and talented people who have relocated into cities to move back to their rural hometowns. Now, this is something that is happening in China right now. The rural areas are becoming attractive again for people to not only to produce and to sell, but also to consume and to travel. So there is unlimited business opportunities nowadays that are materializing in rural areas, and a lot of migrant workers are relocating into the rural hometowns, driven by this renewed economic landscape. So these migrant workers, they are free to they are free to relocate wherever they want, but also there are advantages for them doing so, to relocate to their hometowns, and these advantages are facilitated by the government. Now, another important part of the talent retention, attraction, and retention has to do with training. There have been programs of training addressed first at peasants, then at administrators, at managers, at heads of associations and co-ops, because they are the ones that are better equipped and in a better position to promote and attract these flows of economic and human activity into these rural areas. Therefore, training is also a key element to this talent attraction and retention. And more recently, what have these training programs focused on? Well, they've been focusing on providing training to CEOs, to key leaders of key companies, so they can better understand the rural ecosystem and maybe even relocate to some rural areas in order to continue to develop the growth of their companies. So this is another important part. This is the second part, which is about talent revitalization. Then number 3, cultural revitalization. And this includes two main aspects. First of all, I must say culture is the soul of rural China. People pay great attention, a great deal of attention to preserving the culture of rural areas. So cultural preservation means to transmit the culture between generations, across generations. And this process is intertwined with everything else. We have different goals for different stages of revitalization, but across this whole project, the culture is the soul of the whole process. And as we know, this modernization has to do with culture, because urban culture is urban culture is very different than rural culture. So, this is why rural culture requires a great deal of protection in terms of architecture, in terms of customs, in terms of different practices. It requires a great deal of protection, so some key elements of it can be preserved as it transforms and evolves across this modernization process. Now, I know a lot of people like to focus on the economy, on commerce, but culture is also very important. Fourth point that I would like to talk about is the ecology of it. The revitalization, the ecological revitalization. Well, here you can see a lot of data, a lot of information. First of all, that we have had a huge transformation of the environment in the rural areas across this industrialization process, such as the building of water treatment facilities, the managing of waste disposal, the increasing of bathroom facilities for the population, and the reduction of the use of fertilizers and pesticides. All of this is these points are very important, and they have been key components uh, of this ecological revitalization. And I'm not only talking about building more bathrooms, but building greater capacities for water treatment, for waste disposal, for reducing the harm to the environment. And in this area, we have also been implementing some leading technologies, some leading green technologies in terms of reduction of greenhouse gases emissions. For example, if you uh, if you've seen online in some social media platforms, there is a specific kind of shrimp that Chinese people are really fond of. And this shrimp is known to be found in rice fields. And rice fields are also known to be the home of ducks. So then if we can see videos of rice fields in which we have the rice, the ducks, and the shrimp coexisting and growing together. This is what we are talking about when we talk about integration of the environment. So, as you know, China has a long agricultural tradition, and this long agricultural tradition has been also integrated into our modern managing practices. We have an area which is the origin of the three great rivers of China. And in that area, we have invested a great deal of money, of resources in order to increase the preservation of the environment. Now, the fifth revitalization within the comprehensive revitalization process is the organizational revitalization. And if you follow China closely, maybe you're already familiar with this, but China has a very efficient and detailed organization and governance systems, starting at the not only at the provincial level, but at the village level, at the county level, at the province level. Um, it's a complex and detailed political mm, system that allows us to have uh, this organized and effective governance. And as you know, Chinese different levels of political organization are autonomous in a way, which means they are able to make their own decisions. They have choose their own leaders, their own committees, and these committees are responsible of developing the local village, for example, with the available resources. Now, let's go to the fourth part of the presentation. So, what are the let's talk about the policy design and management innovations. And let's talk about some experiences that I can share with you today. When you are studying something, some specific topics about China, you'll always come across the 5-year plans, right? So we're all familiar with the 5-year plans, and we are approaching the end of a 5-year plan, and then a new 5-year plan will come along. So every 5 years, we have a 5-year plan that is designed by the government, and it's a unified plan that goes from the higher levels to the more specific regional levels. And this 5-year plan system is the reason why the national government can so efficiently unify and implement policy across the whole territory with a high level of precision and efficiency. Now, let's talk about the specifics of this system. Well, first of all, we start with a pilot project, with a test project. We first, if we have a new idea for a policy, we implement it on a regional, on a local, small scale capacity, and then we evaluate its results. And if it works, and if we see it has a promising path of development, then we can move forward to larger regions and a larger scale. Now, sometimes developing countries come across problems regarding implementation of different policies. And the origin of those problems is the miscommunication and the conflict between the different levels of government and the different regions, right? So sometimes the national level of government wants to implement a policy for a specific region, but they want to apply it. They want to apply the same policy for all the different regions across the national territory. And sometimes these policies don't work because what is needed in a certain region is different than what is needed in another region. So something very important for Chinese policy making is to understand and adapt to the specific necessities of individual municipalities and of different areas of the territory. So China can be divided into different, it can be divided between north, south, west, east, or it can be divided across coastline and mainline, or it could be divided taking as a criteria production of different goods. So there are different ways of classifying and dividing the country. But the important point is that we can divide the country into different regions, into different areas, and then respect and understand the specific necessities of each of those regions. Now, everything, second point regarding this policy design and management is that everything is project driven. From the national level to the village level, everything is based on projects. Governments at each level of government, for example, the financial office, the infrastructure office, like every office, they have to work on the basis of projects. And then each project has a specific budget. And this budget needs to be allocated and needs to be formulated on the specific characteristics, based on the specific characteristics of the project and on the specific needs of the population that is going to be affected by that project. And this includes infrastructure projects such as roads, such as different kinds of buildings, but also small scale projects are also affected by this same policy design mechanism. So here the important thing is sometimes the small villages, they do not have the best organizational skills. And it can be challenging to implement certain public policies, especially in remote areas. So implementing these policies through small scale projects is a very effective way of reaching out remote areas, because then you get the local community engaged into these projects, and they can experience, these local communities, these local peasants, they can experience for themselves the different transformations that these projects affect, and the different benefits or affectations that they may suffer derived from these projects. And then they can give us feedback, and based on that feedback, the policy designers can adjust and improve future projects. Now, the following point is about the actors. Uh, well, here the actors are peasants. The main subjects of this story are the peasants, and all of these revitalization policies are built around peasants, about their well-being, about improving their well-being, about improving their tools, the tools they have available. That is the center of our public policy design. Everything is to serve the rural population, to serve and activate their agency within society. So if we designed policies and try to implement policies that were not of the interest and did not engage in any way whatsoever with the peasants, that would be a big problem. They need to be heavily involved in this policy design and implementation process, because they are the main actors. If they were very apathetic and they were not interested in these programs, then that would mean our programs have a problem. And this may sound simple, this may sound easy, but policy design and implementation is very hard, it's very complex. How to achieve projects and policies that engage the rural population, that is the key question. And in fourth place, as I have said before, this whole process is a government-led process. All of the resource management, the service management, including transportation, electricity, health services, is all led and organized by the government in order to favor the rural areas and its population. And all of these points that I have mentioned for me are important for implementation of policy regarding the rural revitalization in China. Now, moving forward, I would like to talk about some of the challenges that we face. So let's look at this graph. As I have said, to promote employment in cities for peasants is a great policy. It has allowed them to have meaningful increases in their income, but it also comes with some problems, because the peasants relocate in the cities, but their residency registration continues to be in the rural areas. So this has some problems for them, because some big cities such as Beijing or Shanghai, if they haven't changed the residency registration card, then they cannot access different services in the cities. For example, if they haven't changed their registration from their original rural communities and they move to Beijing or Shanghai, their children will not be able to go to school until they change that residence registration. So this system, which is known in Chinese for its Chinese name hukou, it's a system that is showing some signs of it's reaching the limits of what it was originally designed for, and we may have to think of reformulating it or adjusting it to better serve the current conditions of the country. So, for example, if you are from Puebla, let's say like in the Mexican case, if you are from Puebla or you are from Chiapas and you move to Mexico City to work, well, in the case of China, what that would mean is maybe if you're still registered under Puebla or under Chiapas, you could not access some medical benefits or some public services in Mexico City because of that registration. So this is something that we need to address. And another thing that I have talked about is young people are living in increasingly high numbers. And here, specifically in order to study, because before, well, all of these processes are natural. It's natural for them to emerge in any development process, but these are also urgent problems that we need to address as fast as possible. So before, if we had so with the increase of migrant populations, the cost of different services has also been increasing. Now, some other problems that we are facing currently in this industrialization process has to do with land ownership and land rights. There are a lot of peasants that still hold land rights over rural areas and territories. And what this means is they haven't, so they still own these territories, but then they do not live there anymore. So what this means is these lands are not being utilized because the owners or the people who have the rights over the lands are living somewhere else. They're living in the cities. So this is something that has to be addressed as well. And this can be addressed through different regulation regarding the amount of land that is allowed for a single peasant to own in China, which can be modified. Now, agriculture in China is rather difficult. So that is the reason why China has not relied on expanding the area for agriculture, but it has, because that's not the farmable area is very hard to expand. So unlike the cases of the United States or other countries in which they relied on increasing the amount of available area for agriculture, we cannot do that because the conditions of the country do not allow for that. So then China focused on enhancing and improving the service sector. Now, the same goes for Japan or South Korea. We know they don't have that many natural resources. So then they are also trapped in a trap of small scale agriculture. And because their agriculture is such a small scale, they heavily rely on government subsidies, and they rely on highly protectionist measures by the government. And this has become an increasing amount of their national budget, and it exerts great pressure to their fiscal structure. So we are not, in China, we don't want to fall into that same trap, and we don't want for the government subsidies to increase to the level that it could be detrimental to the nation's finances. And this is evident when we look at the different resources that we have per capita in China regarding water resources and other kinds of resources. And because we have so many small scale agriculture areas and so small scale peasants that also have scattered land. Their lands are not always connected to each other. Sometimes they are scattered across the territory. So this greatly difficult to engage um, in heavy technological transformation, because when you have scattered lands, crops that are scattered across the land, it's very hard to address this problem from the equipment or machinery transformation point of view. Now, here we have some numbers regarding the different production capacities divided by different products. And basically, even though China is an open market, the lands that are available to individual farmers are usually very small, very limited, and this poses a challenge for the agricultural sector in the country. So this is, I think, an area that is urgent as well, and it's a problem that we currently have regarding this process. Now, talking about land leasing, as we have said, some people relocate from the rural areas to the city, and then they leave their territories unoccupied, and sometimes they will lease it to someone else. But these lease agreements are not long-term, they're just temporal agreements. So this means that it's not a stable benefit. And without a stable benefit, it's very hard to have a sustainable agricultural development model, because investment in land should be long-term. But because these lease contracts are short-term, then there's a high level of uncertainty. So then the people who sign these leases and rent these lands, they don't wanna invest a lot. They don't wanna do large investments in the land, because they may not have the rights to use it in a couple of years. So this is a very limiting factor as well. Now, as we can see, the contribution by these farmers to the gross domestic product is not that high. So most of the peasants are in this first sector. In the developed nations, most of them belong to the third sector, to the tertiary sector. But in the case of China, we still need more and more farmers and peasants to go and become part of the urban population and engage into the services sector, and not only into the raw production of grain and raw materials. But this conversion requires technical knowledge and specialized knowledge. So we need to have a better and larger scale training programs, so we can allow for these peasants and these farmers to have added value to the things that they produce. So we still have a lot of work to do in this regard. We have a long road ahead of us. And this is also something that could help us solve a series of problems, including employment. So as you can see in this graph, first bar is United States, then we have Japan, and as you can see, their tertiary sector is very developed. 70% is on their tertiary sector and their tertiary industry. So that's the kind of model that we want to follow in the case of our development. We need to bring more peasant population into the tertiary industry. So in this way, we can better benefit the peasant population and we can create more jobs and increase the numbers of employment available for the rural population. Now, in this way, then in this way, people migrating from the countryside can better establish themselves in the cities. Now, here some data about the huge gap between urban and rural areas and some of the things that I have mentioned. As you can see, this gap continues to close, but we still have a long way to go. And income amongst the peasant population has been increasing, but not as fast, not as quickly as that of the urban population. And currently, I think it's very hard to continue to achieve this increase in their disposable income. So I think we still have some time to go in closing this gap, because this requires for us to adjust the structural relations between cities and rural areas. If we don't do this, it's very hard for peasants to negotiate and increase their own income. Now, this graph, looking at this graph, here we can see as we can see, we have had a very visible increase in the TFP. But if we compare it to countries such as the United States, we still have a long time to go. Because, and this is looking at the value added per labor in comparison to the grain yield per unit area. Now, let's move on to the final part of the presentation, which is looking at the future. Where are we going to? Well, we're already on this path towards the future, which is what has been stated in the last National Congress, in the third plenary session of the 20th National Congress, which is one of the points that were addressed was to how to better promote the integration between cities and the rural areas. And it was said that cities need to provide support for the rural areas, and industry needs to support agriculture. But there's still a lot of space for reforms. And if you're interested in development economics, you would know that the financial sector loves capital, but they hate the poor. And in China, we're trying to not go that path. Even though we are looking at that a lot of capital is being transferred from rural areas into urban areas. Not only capital, but people are also migrating from rural areas to urban areas. So the question right now is how to attract capital and how to attract talent back to the rural areas. And this is a very urgent question that we need to solve. As we all know, the ROI in the tertiary sector, in the tertiary industry, is way higher. The rate of the profits to be made are way higher in the tertiary industry than in the primary industry. So this is a challenge. Another challenge is when it comes to education and health, because this investment depend not only on the will of the government. Of course, the government is willing to invest more on the rural area, but it also depends on its own capacities and its own governance improvement process. So there are many areas of integration between urban and rural areas, and this is an ongoing process of implementation and improvement through pilot projects and larger scale projects. So I think, in my opinion, this integration process can serve as an experience for the whole world to learn, because it's not a predatory process. It's a very moderate process, very fluid process. So I think moderate is the key word. And moderation is the key concept that I would like to emphasize today. Because this transformation process, as I have mentioned, is very respectful to every aspect of social life. It is not trying to deprive people from their resources, and it's not trying to harm the environment either. So now let's move on to the conclusions. The process of rural development has showed that the countryside is not synonymous with backward, but it is a key element that can drive growth and that can achieve a stable model of development. China has gone through different economic crises across history, but we know from a comprehensive perspective, despite these crises, this development process has been quite stable. And I'm referring to the overall economic development process of the Chinese nation. So why has it been so stable despite all the different economic turmoil that we have gone through at different stages? Well, because of its rural element. The countryside is the great stabilizer within the Chinese economic growth, because the Chinese government has always realized that the rural element of its economy is of the utmost important, and it works as a kind of buffer. And as I have said, there are no magic formulas. Each country must find its own way of development. But this whole process, as I have mentioned, we have been able to experience it because we have studied our own reality, our own conditions, and we have adapted our goals and the design of our processes to better serving the specific needs of our own population. Well, this is the kind of things that I wanted to present to you today. It's been 90 minutes, and if you have any questions or comments, we can now engage. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Mao. It has been an splendid and long lecture, quite enriching for a Latin American audience. Thank you. Thanks so much. Can you listen to me, Dr. Mao? Are you listening to me in Chinese? Are you listening to the interpreting? Uh, can you can you listen to the translation in Chinese? Yes. So we have a lot of questions that have been asked by the audience, and I hereby would like to summarize some of the important of the key issues that have been addressed by the audience. And let me remind you that most of the audience are connecting from somewhere in Latin America or the Caribbean region. So the question that I would like to begin with has to do with land ownership in China. Land ownership in China and the different entities and ways of organizing within the countryside, and how these conflicts are resolved uh, in the countryside. The conflicts that arise linked to environmental concerns, to land ownership concerns, etc. May we, shall we start by answering this question? Doctor, were you able to listen to my question? Yeah. Um, all right. We after some technical difficulties, we will resume, and Dr. Ma, let me restate. We have a lot of questions that have been raised by our audience, but I would like to summarize some of the key questions that we have seen. So, first of all, I would like to talk about land ownership in China. How does it work? And what kind of institutions, including unions and other organizations, exist in the countryside in China? And how do they work? And also, if you could talk a little bit about how to manage different conflicts arising what are the institutional mechanisms to solve some of the conflicts and problems that may arise in the process of the modernization of the countryside involving land ownership, environment, etc. Yes. So let me begin by talking about the land ownership system in China, which is a collective land ownership at the village level. So the levels in China are municipality, then town, then village. So let's say that we have 100 households in this village. Well, it means that the territory of the village, the land, belongs to these 100 households. All of them have of the owning rights over this land. But so this is not a state owner. It's not a state ownership model for land. In the case of the villages, we're talking about collective ownership. And this village concept is like a political concept, but actually the villages can be subdivided into different groups. And the groups are divided by household. So, and even those households can be divided by individuals, right? So this land distribution system is usually the term for enjoying these rights is 30 years or 50 years. So it could even remain after someone passes and passes down the rights to the next generation. It really depends. It varies from case to case. So the village owns the land and the village is an autonomous organization. The government is an entity that provides public services to the village. And the village inhabitants can use the land to obtain economic benefits from the land. So this system came about in the first stage that I have referred to after the foundation of the People's Republic. And back then we had a percentage of the benefits going to the house, to the village in itself, and then the remaining portion went to the different household that formed the village. So most of the benefit went directly to the peasants. So there is not a lot of benefits that are going to the state directly. Therefore, there is not a lot of disputes or conflicts that arise in this regard. Also, the land itself, everyone knows who each block of land belongs to. And people who are foreign or do not belong to the village, they cannot use the land of the village. And the people from outside the village, they can rent the land. But the use of the land corresponds to the people who live in that village. So people who come from outside the village, they could pay a rent if they want to use the land. And in this case, there could be some disputes that could arise. For example, let's say you, Dr. Dussel, you have been working outside of the village for 20 years, but then outside of the village, you didn't have a lot of luck. But then you find that when you come back, you find that the land on the village that belonged to you has already been rented out. It has been rented out to a third party, and they are already making good use of the land and having profits and benefits. Well, then how would you regain the use of that land? Well, that would be a situation that would have to be resolved between individuals, right? You would have to resolve that between the people who you rented the land to and yourself. And of course, you could have the mediation of a governmental institution or mechanism, but it's basically a civil dispute. Now, if we talk about the outskirts of cities where industry can also take place, let's say, for example, you, Dr. Dussel, you are the committee secretary, and you want for this specific area to become a touristic spot to attract more tourism. Well, you cannot make this decision on your own. You need to have the approval of 2/3 of the town, because this is a collective ownership model. So you cannot decide that. You cannot decide that by your own. You need to submit that proposal to the committee, to the village committee. So I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but these are decisions that are made at the committee level and at the collective ownership and administration level. Thank you very much, Dr. Mao. So what are the expectations of these 290 million migrants, rural migrants, as you have described? Since in Latin America, we don't have this kind of phenomenon. We don't have such a large base of migrant rural workers. I mean, 290 million, that's more than most of the Latin American countries' population. So what are the expectations regarding these 290 million migrant workers? Let's say like floating population of sorts. Are you planning to modify the hukou system in China in order to allow this floating population to relocate? This is a very specific question. And of course, whoever asked it has a deeper understanding of the Chinese situation. Well, as we know, in Latin America, in Latin America, there is no hukou system. But let me explain a little bit about the hukou system. The reason why we have it in China is because back in the day, we really wanted to promote industrialization. So how did we achieve this? By turning rural countryside workers into city industry workers. And then we promoted this through the hukou system. So if you come to the city, we'll give you a hukou, a residence registration that comes along with different benefits and with different conditions that allow you to develop in the city. But then back then, even though we were providing those kinds of benefits to people coming from the countryside, if they didn't find enough opportunities in the city, what would happen? They would not, if they couldn't find a job in the city after relocating, they would have to sleep on the streets, and then we would have a serious homeless population problem. And so that is why it's so important that they maintain their rights within the countryside, because in the economic crisis of 2018, we have near to 30 million people who have to relocate to the countryside in the face of the economic difficulties. But after the crisis passed, they came back to the cities. So yes, the hukou system might be a sort of modern issue that needs to be resolved, but needs to be resolved gradually, because the hukou system also comes together with a series of benefits, social benefits in terms of transportation, public health, social security. So we cannot just address 290 people at the same time because the economic cost would be humongous. So we need to do it in a scientific and gradual manner. And we need to start from this understanding and do it step by step, by which I mean we need to extend the covering of these services, and then elevate the quality of the public services in the countryside so they are leveling to the same standard that exists in the cities. So for low tier cities or cities that are not that big, actually the quality and the level of public services is not that different between the cities and the countryside. But for cities such as Beijing or Shanghai, then there is a big difference. So I think one potential way of addressing this problem is to start by providing hukou to countryside population into smaller cities, providing them hukous for smaller cities that can have a good standard of social services, but not to that level of huge cities such as Beijing or Shanghai. Because giving hukou in Beijing or Shanghai to someone has a huge economic cost associated with it. So then we can start small and then build slowly from there. Now, let me give you an example. A medium tier city, the cost of land will go up if we start because a lot of the people do not want to just abandon the land that they have in the rural areas. So the government is addressing this problem through some sort of bond system. So for example, you can buy stock or you can buy stock of your land back in your rural hometown. So then you can live. So by turning this land into stock that you can buy, it's a way of securing or promoting people moving into the cities. Because that way, okay, so people in countryside are not willing to go into the cities because they know their land will go up in value in the future. So they just don't want to abandon their land in the countryside. But then if we allow them to invest in this countryside land in the way of stocks, then they can move to the city and then they can still see some economic benefit if the land goes up in value because they own some stock. So this is one of the many strategies that we have available to try to solve this problem gradually. But it's definitely a process that will take time and it needs to be done step by step. Right now, if we try to do it overnight, it's very difficult because obviously those who benefit economically from the current state of affairs will not warmly welcome a radical change in the hukou system as it is functioning right now. But and this is not only economic benefits. We're talking about benefits such as education for children, transportation benefits. So people who already enjoy these privileges, of course, do not wanna pass them on to other individuals. Thank you very much, Doctor. We have another question. from Brazil. Dr. Mao, on one side, you presented very clearly the great efforts that China has exerted in order to achieve self-reliance in the food sector. And the agricultural sector plays a key role in this regard. But also, during the last decade, China has increased its imports of food products, even basic products such as soy, but also other products. And Latin America and Brazil, in particular, play a key role in this regard. So, what is your opinion of this contradiction, apparent contradiction between increasing self-reliance on the food sector, but also increasing imports of food products? Yes, actually, we import a lot of soy from Brazil. That is true. Not only soy, also sugar, chicken, poultry of different kinds. Even beef from Argentina we import. And I would like to talk about this in this way. From the establishment of the People's Republic, the first time we imported was 96. Before 1996, we mostly exported. We were exporting over 16,000 tons of corn annually. We were an exporting country. We were an exporting nation. So now when we hear people say, well, China is importing all of these products from abroad. Well, you need to take a look at the production, at the total production and the total needs of the country. For example, I mean, we are self-reliant, 101% self-reliant in the case of wheat and rice. I mean, we import rice from Thailand, but it's just for the high-end market. So I believe we've been importing corn starting in 2020. Before that, we were not importing. I don't think so. And maybe you think it's what the amount of corn that we are importing is a lot if you look at the absolute number, but relatively speaking, it's not that much. It's not that much. And you got to take a look at the national needs. Before, we used to import soy. When we started importing soy is because we need to produce more and more more and more seed oils, and because we didn't have enough production of soy to satisfy this oil production, and this is mainly due to the level of to life standards increasing and elevating. So it's a good thing overall. So yes, this is a good case in which we can see how we can complement each other. You know, like we need some extra soy, we can import it from Brazil, and this is a win-win relation. This carries economical benefit for both Brazil and us. So, for example, beef you didn't used to be an import product, but then because the level of um, life, the quality of life in China has dramatically increased, then a lot of people want to eat beef. And sometimes people may even want beef from a specific origin, for example, beef from the USA or beef from Argentina. So this is why an import market has emerged and it exists now. So I believe in the future, we will continue to import, but I think just as much as we need to satisfy our national needs. And I don't think the consumption would be increasing a lot in the future because the tendencies So as the life standards of people increase, the next stage in improving life quality is to eat healthier. So I don't foresee that we will be importing a lot of seed oils in excess of what we import now in the future, because people want to eat healthier. They want to make healthier choices. Of course, we will need to import soy to keep feeding cattle. Maybe we could, maybe new import markets will be opened and will emerge, but for different reasons. For example, the development of cattle industry, of different, for example, animal feed in China has, this industry has increased in China along the growth of the cattle industry in China. Nowadays, we're also importing some tropical fruit from Southeast Asia because people want to eat fruit now. So these import markets that are being opened are also a natural result of the development and the betterment of the life standards of our population. But overall, I think we have maintained a really great relations with these kind of countries such as Brazil, and our import-export relations are going better than ever. Actually, there's been investment going both ways as well, you know. And China has invested in Brazil, looking for corporations in the direct investment, direct foreign investment area. So I think this is a natural growing process, but I don't think this opening of new import markets are related to self-reliance or self-sufficiency in the food sector. I think these are different things, and they come from different factors, including we have had some, for example, pig production. We have had some phytosanitary challenges, such as different pandemics or viruses, but they are isolated cases. Thank you so much, Dr. Mao. Well, I think we have just one last question. One last question. And this was asked by Vladimir Mendez in particular. Dr. Mao, you have said that we are at the beginning of a new stage in which people want to better their health, their life quality. And this might lead to different transformations and developments in the agricultural sector oriented towards providing healthier products. So new crops, right? And when we have these kinds of new crops, a lot of the times production decreases or falls sharply. So I don't know if you could offer us some thoughts regarding this ecological agriculture new sector and what its effect would be on the traditional agricultural sector in China, whether it has led to a decrease in traditional production or not. This is a difficult question to address. Why? Because I think it's like even a challenge. Because we are right now at a transition stage, a transition phase. And in any transition, you will come across temporary challenges, temporary pain points that will make you transform. So, and of course, it can temporarily affect the traditional crops. For example, Yunnan province. As we know, as you know, we grow flowers, fresh flowers. We grow coffee beans in Yunnan. But before it wasn't like this. Before it was just mainly grain to satisfy the domestic demand. But later, its agricultural industry transformed. Its agricultural sector transformed from grain into coffee beans into flowers. And of course, this had a certain level of affectation to local peasants, to local farmers, because flowers and coffee were new to these local farmers. A lot of them didn't know how to grow coffee and flowers, so they had to learn. So of course it started a transformation in Yunnan province, and it's in agricultural sector. So I think first of all, we need to have a signal, a price signal, and this price signal needs to be clear enough so it can guide local peasants into which are the new crops that will bring them the most economic benefit. And yes, this may come with some negative impact on traditional crops, which means the government will have to help ease this transition, and also will have to support the countryside with relevant infrastructure and technology. For example, tropical fruit is not something that um, is cultivated or is grown in China, but nowadays it's an increasingly present product in the market. So doesn't mean that all of the tropical fruit we're going to be growing it in China, but there might be some transformation, some room for improvement and growth in that regard. And then here the key of agricultural technology, the role of agricultural technology is key. And going back to the Brazil example, China has had great deals of technological cooperation with Brazil in terms of soy. So how to make soy production more eco-friendly, you know, and this kind of technological interchange and cooperation can benefit everyone. Including China has had some leading scientists that have proposed and developed some eco-friendly technologies and solutions for growing rice, for example. And this technology has been shared with regions in Southeast Asia, and now they're benefiting from applying this Chinese developed technology. So, you know, this is a continuous process of exchange and mutual benefit and cooperation to grow together and create relations of mutual benefit with different nations in the world. So in this case, I think the government still plays a key role, and there's a lot that can still be done in this regard to support this transition. Now, talking about the first part of the question, which is how the improvement in the life standards of the people lead to healthier choices and healthier requirements. Well, this is a gradual process. This is not something that happens overnight. It's not like they wake up one day and they have a radically new set of demands. It's just like one day at a time kind of process. And this is why this transformation of the agricultural sector is also gradual. And this is why the price indicators are key in this transformation process, because the price points are the ones that are going to let the farmers know what are the future crops that they need to focus on to navigate this transition process, this transformation process. So the one thing that we need to avoid is for peasants and farmers to become stagnant in the face of this transition. Thank you very much, Dr. Mao. We're very thankful to you for your patience and for your time. And many members of our audience have asked regarding some of your publications. So hopefully you can share with us some links or some resources or that may be of interest to our audience. May there be in Chinese or in English or even Spanish. If you could share some of these resources, that would be highly appreciated by our audience. Yes, and Dr. Dussel, in my PowerPoint at the beginning, I have introduced my email, and you can request information through that means. And of course, I can share with you the PowerPoint presentation and some resources of interest. Of course, what I have presented today is my personal view, my personal opinion from an academic perspective regarding the work that has been done in China, some of the success cases that we've had, and some of the areas of opportunity and improvement, and some of the challenges that we need to face looking forward. And I think this can be very helpful for developing nations because there are a lot of elements in common. Some of them may not be new, but some of them may be of great help for some developing countries. And the challenges that we are facing, a lot of developing countries will face and are facing right now. So if you're interested, and if you could send me some of the questions, if there are more questions that were not properly addressed due to the time limitations, you can send them to me through email. And of course, I can happily reply to them. And of course, I can share some English materials with you. And you said that there are many people who are very interested in understanding the land ownership system and the technological transfer between Latin America and China. So I think if we have the opportunity, we can do some joint studies of compared policies amongst nations. And today we don't have enough time. It's only 90 minutes, but in the future, I think we can continue this academic exchange and go deeper. And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Dr. Mao. Of course, we take note of all of your comments and suggestions and of your invitation, of course. All right. Thank you, Doctor. We will let you rest now, and we will keep in touch with you, with Renmin University of China. And thank you so much for today's presentation. And may I extend my greetings to all of the audience that is with us right now. We've had tremendous interest across these 5 sessions. So we will continue to be in touch, and may this be a great starting point for a larger and deeper reflection process on Latin America and its relation to China. Thank you so much, everyone. May you have a wonderful day. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Dussel, and thank you to the interpreters. Yes. And thank you very much to UDUALCE, the Union of Universities of Latin America and the Caribbean region, to Marco, to Simon Burati, Marco Villegas, and of course, to our interpreters who have done a magnificent job. Thank you so much, Ipojao and Alonso Cornaro from Shaya Consulting. Thank you so much. May you have a wonderful evening or morning.